Welcome, everyone, to American Girls. This is the podcast where we're reliving the American Girls series book by book, except here on Patreon, where we're reliving basically anything we think counts as within the worldview of this show. I'm Mary.
I'm still Allison.
And still Allison, we gather here today to take on yet another volume in the Dear America series.
Yes, you've heard of coal miner's daughter. Today we bring you a coal miner's bride.
I almost needed to call a therapist many times in this reading experience. I am traumatized. I'm not over it. It was intense. The Diary of Anetka Kaminska, Lattimer, Pennsylvania, 1896. What a ride. Allison, had you read this one before?
I had not. This one was new to me. This one came out in 2000. So I was probably still reading these books, but this particular one just didn't come up for me. We had asked you all what we should read, and Dear America won. And then this was a book that was mentioned a few times. You all gave us some really amazing ideas, I think, for future episodes.
Yes.
Like a Karen Cushman book, or visiting the Cabbage Patch birthing factory in Georgia.
Sure.
Which we would love to do.
Would love to do that.
And somehow we landed here in Pennsylvania in 1896.
You know what? I've never been here before. It's all new to me. And, I had not read this one myself either. And I really didn't know what to expect coming into it. And this one was a lot. I'll just say that. I mean, we thought that Remembrance, our last Dear America adventure, was a wild ride coming to the air quotes New World. Speaking of Thanksgiving, it's almost Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. This one was darker by many percentage points.
We've been through the sinking of the Titanic. We've been through a squabble over landing on Plymouth Rock.
Sure.
And for this one, we were like, let's go to an industrial massacre in a small town north of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania in the late 19th century. And I'll just say, there's a lot of hard to pronounce words in this book, or hard for me, I should say. There is a pronunciation guide. I think for our purposes, based on this, I read her name as Anetka.
Oops. Yeah. My apologies.
I think, and I'll just say up front, if we get something wrong, we are doing our best. Polish is a beautiful language that is just not familiar to me.
Yes. You hear me flipping aggressively through this book looking for the pronunciation guide.
I actually think, so if you read along with us, I think page 203, which is our pronunciation guide, I think this, honestly, I'm just going to read a few phrases. I think it gives you great insight into what we were facing. So the way that I learned how to say her name is in the translation of the phrase, poor motherless Anetka. We also learned how to say, stupid rooster. Mm-hmm. He is impossible.
Yes.
An appeal to God. Lazy wife. And then this sequence. Help me. I don't want it. Stop it. It's pleasant. Oh my. Oh no. Dog's blood.
Wow. I mean, that does really, in a way, it's like, why give a summary of the book when that has done that? It does sort of make us reflect, even before we get into this specific book, that this series seems to be organized around moments of national trauma and not necessarily national triumph, which is certainly a choice. And I think it actually sort of works for this book because it drops you down in something that I doubt you learn about in school, which is obviously this really important national moment in the labor rights movement. I did not learn about this in school, certainly. But wow, I mean, this book, it leaves American Girl in the dust in a way, and you can tell that it's written for a slightly older reader because they're willing to really get into the trauma of a lot of these experiences in a way that American Girl would sort of kind of glance right by, I think, because they're pitching at younger readers.
So, I mean, we talk a lot about the key authors in the American Girl universe, but I did a little research on the author of this book, who's Susan Campbell Bartoletti. And she writes, honestly, a really beautiful set of passages in the back about what inspired this book and her own family stories. Susan does not shy away from anything that's controversial, anything that's
Ooh.
dark. So
Ooh.
here's just some selections from her resume. Susan Campbell Bartoletti is also the author of a book called Black Potatoes. And we're not talking about burnt home fries.
Uh-oh.
She also wrote a book called Hitler Youth, followed up
What?
by Terrible Typhoid Mary, followed up by They Called Themselves the KKK. And they were like, Susan, what else do you have in you? And she's like, well, I'm going to take you from impending genocide in Poland to a massacre in Pennsylvania. And then she was like, I got another one in me. This one's called Down the Rabbit Hole. She's like, guess what it's about? Great Chicago Fire. Like, nothing stops her.
Nothing is stopping her. Her dream journal knows no limits. And I feel
No.
like consistently her agent is calling her like, Susan, what else you got? And she's like, let me grab that dream journal. Hitler
Yeah.
Youth, anyone? And it's like, it's a bit strange that that's her. Like, I haven't put that together. I didn't like construct that timeline, but sitting with that is, whew, that's tough.
I mean, there's no topic that's off limits for her, but to your point, it really is a very different set of histories and questions about the past, right? Than we're kind of used to. Like, we're deep right now into Molly McIntyre, and she's like, turnips, you know. We get to Anetka, who is grappling with first, like living in a very intense and scary, violent police state, essentially in Poland in the 1890s, being betrothed to a man who is more than double her age. She's 13, by the way, in this book.
Oh my
And
God.
like moving to a town where like black lung is somehow the least of everyone's problem.
That's like truly the least of it. Absolutely. And yeah, so I mean, I guess we can just jump in by offering an intro of this book is sort of, I would say, split into thirds. So the first third takes place in her hometown in Poland. And we sort of get to drop down and get a sense of the life that she's grown up in, the village that she lives in with her grandmother and her brother. We learn her mother has passed within the last year, and her father has already gone to the United States, where he has a job in a coal mine. And he's hoping to raise enough money to send for all of them. And also at this moment, she's living in Poland, but it's being taken over by Russia. So the Tsar's military are running her village as a police state, as Allison said. And there's a lot going on with that, including like huge anti-Semitism that also results in acts of violence in her community. So the second 2/3 of the book are when something happens in her village where essentially a member of the Tsar's army attempts to rape her or assault her, and a man who's also in the Tsar's army who's been sort of teasing her, I'll put that in scare quotes, like slams a rock into her attacker, like really injuring him. She runs away, and then they're like, okay, it's time to go. And the dad, fortunately or like fortuitously, has sent 3 tickets to go to the United States. And she thinks grandma's going to go with them. But as I said to you off mic, like, if you thought grandma was getting on that boat, try again.
Never.
I won't go into like I would call sea-level plot, which is that grandma's a healer of animals. And we were subjected to a very graphic description of how she turned a calf who is like facing the wrong direction. I never want to hear the phrase or read the phrase, grandma had her arm up the cow's backside up to her shoulder. Like, no person should be subjected to that without a warning, regardless. So grandma's like, I'm staying. You guys go and take Leon, who is the man who saved her. And they all go to the United States and end up in the same town where the dad is a coal miner, where she learns quite a surprise. Allison, I don't know if you want to take the summary from here.
Yeah, happily. So she meets the man who she is going to marry on the 4th of July, which is something that sadly by 1897, she is commemorating in the form of mourning. So in really less than a year, she goes from marrying a widower who actually has 3 young girls that was kept as a secret from her. She is 13, by the way. So she becomes a stepmom very young, not in a Julia Roberts style.
Mm-mm.
And so she's raising these 3 girls who have these beautiful names. And she calls them a garden because they all have these floral names. And she's kind of struggling to be a stepmom. There's a unionization effort Leon comes back into the scene, and sadly, in a turn of events, she herself becomes a widow when her husband dies. There's kind of an implication that it's his fault, like he doesn't set up something in the mine correctly. Ultimately, not long after that, a series of events leads to a kind of uprising in the community and a very intense and violent backlash against people who are trying to organize. Anetka fears that her man, Leon, is dead and she's 14. She's trying to like make some plans for the future. He does live. They do eventually get married and stay married for over 60 years. And they have a daughter who they name Mary.
Wow, great name. Love that name choice. It's this book was like never stopping plot points that like can truly only be rivaled by the Dolly Parton movie we watched last night, which also knew no limits in terms of how much plot they thought we could handle.
Yeah.
And sort of like badly behaving dads. Because what I failed to say before is that when they get the 3 tickets to come to America, he can afford that because he's basically sold his daughter in marriage to someone else, another coal miner. And ends up not being a great marriage for her because, as Allison said, he's a widower. He keeps like getting drunk and referring to her by his dead wife's name. Like, not great. Like, real big yikes material happening in this book.
So I found a review by someone, Emily Coulter, and she says the fact that there are no real surprises in Susan Campbell Bartoletti's historical novel will not detract from readers' enjoyment of the story. And I would just say to that, from my experience, I'm not sure that I enjoyed this. And I will also say I was surprised quite a bit. Like a few things felt predictable. It was like she will somehow end up with Leon. But when I was over 40 pages in and we were still like literally in the weeds of her trying to fix the family's roof, hanging about with the roosters and grandma, I was like, we are never getting out of Poland.
No. You've
like,
also
this is
forgotten the beekeeping. You've also forgotten
beekeeping.
Allison, please. It's like this person's beekeeping interest is so deep and really like in a way it's like this author is making an argument about economic transformation because this is a craft that she can do and she can do it entirely by herself. She's quite adept at it. She's learned it from grandma. And she not only can produce honey, but can produce all these other side like products, like derivative products, including like a face cream that it ends up rich white ladies enjoy buying in America. But it's like, that's interesting because there's so much industrialization happening and like the effects of that around the rest of the book, including these union disputes. I mean, had I thought about this a little bit more, like having this set in Lattimer in 1896 should have tipped off that we were going to be like leading up to the massacre there. Did not happen for me because I was just so in the moment in this book. But you're right. It's like the Poland piece. This is the first year America that we've read that spends like actually a fair amount of time in the person's home country.
Well, the Titanic, though, as well. We were in that orphanage for a long time.
I don't know. I feel like I left that behind. Like as soon as we hit the Titanic, I was like, we've always lived in this level of luxury. Like I don't remember anything else.
I do think something I've noticed across this series is there's a very slow and careful building of character and like a very like layered approach. And then a lot of the action comes late. It's like you don't know what you're building to always, but you are definitely building to something.
All but to the point where actually I think that's overdone because by the end of the book, so we get through the massacre and we're like, did Leon die? Like, where is he? He disappears for a number of days and you're like, where is he? And then he comes back and the last page of the book is them just like reconnecting where she's like, you're not dead. And he's like, correct, I'm still here. And then it's like, next page, epilogue. And it's like, they end up getting married. They're married for 67 years. They have a daughter named Mary. The daughter, Violet, her stepdaughter, like, or adopted daughter, runs away to marry an Italian when she's a teenager. And it's like, what? Like, these details, these fictional details are wild. But it's like, we couldn't get that moment almost like in a Hallmark movie where they reconnect and Leon's like, hey, I'm going to marry you. We've made it through this. Like, things are going to be okay, at least between us. Instead, at the end of the book, you're like, well, okay, he's alive and that's good, but where are we going here?
I think what's hard is though, I have a nephew who's 12 and the fact that he's 13. The fact that he even sends text messages like very much wows me. And I think you can make either both too much or too little of how different age was 120 to 130 years ago. And I
Yeah.
think obviously she's being raised with a very different set of expectations than like a middle class child would be today in the United States in a suburb. At the same time, she has a very kind of like cool, calm, and collected demeanor about how she approaches this forced marriage and the way that she becomes an instant stepmom to three. And I think where it almost kind of works for her is like she's not really so much married to this man as just like in charge of his family. And like she's
Yes.
coming from a boarding house context. And as soon as he dies, she's like, well, I'll just run a boarding house. And it's like she basically has like a slew of caretaking roles. And that doesn't change that much over the course of the book.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I think you're bringing up a major point for me, which is sort of like this book makes you reflect quite a bit on how our expectations of people's lives and different, like when it's appropriate for certain life events to take place. How is that a transhistorical concept and when is it historically contingent? So, for example, like her getting married at 14 or like, let's say 13. I think she was married at 13.
Mm-hmm.
She's a widow at 14. I mean, even just saying those words out loud, you're like, oh my God, like I can't even conceive of this. Like, I'm sorry, young lady, you can't even go to an R-rated movie. Like, what's happening here? And even that's like a trans-historical comparison, obviously, but we know obviously that there are women who were married at similar ages and had to take on these huge responsibilities. So maybe it's just a reflection of our distance from that moment that makes it feel so shocking, in the same way that when I saw the Jerry Lee Lewis movie and realized he married his 13-year-old cousin, I was similarly shocked and appalled. But it is something as a reading experience to read something from a first person point of view of someone who's having to go through things that I cannot have imagined going through when I was 13 and, had I read this book at that age. So it is that disjuncture, I think, kind of works for the book in a way, but also creates like discomfort, which maybe is purposeful.
Do you know who also got married at 13?
Is it Loretta Lynn?
Yeah.
I don't know how much time we have to get into Loretta Lynn, but we both have deep feelings about coal miner's daughter and Loretta.
Yeah, I mean, she had a famously tumultuous relationship, right? Unlike Dolly Parton, who has been married to the same person who genuinely may or may not be a real man
Right.
anymore.
We don't know.
For the entirety of her career. I was reading today that Loretta Lynn kind of famously played up the youth of her marriage in part to appear folksy, like in part to sort of like hail to her origins and where she comes from. And of course, she's famous for being the daughter of a coal miner, not so much a wife in that context. I listened to enough true crime podcasts to know also that the laws surrounding marriage before adulthood still vary a lot all over the place.
I think what's interesting about Loretta Lynn, to bring her into this conversation, is that if you've ever seen that movie, which is genuinely very, very good, or read anything about actual Loretta Lynn's life, something that's very fraught in her life is her marriage to Do. I don't know what his actual name is, but like that's what they call him.
I think it's Do.
Okay, let's say that's, wow, I'd love to see his birth certificate, but okay. So Do constantly, like, it's very well known, like he was not faithful to her in their marriage, but was also reliant upon her for their economic kind of well-being. She was the breadwinner in their family and continue, like he's passed, but like continues to presumably be a breadwinner for like extended family members as well. Something about Anetka that's interesting is that the beekeeping actually is important because it's something that she can do to provide supplemental income to the family, which is actually really important. And something that was interesting to me was both Stanley, her first husband, and Leon, who goes on to be her second husband, neither one of them are threatened by her beekeeping as like something that rivals like them being the breadwinner. If anything, they both provide her with bee boxes to, is that right? I think I'm saying like beat boxes and I know that's wrong, but that's what it's called in the book. I don't know anything personally about beekeeping. Feel free to correct me. But essentially, like, this is the essential equipment she needs to do what she knows how to do. That's otherwise just based on her skill. And if anything, they're like, here you go. Like, that's her wedding present. Stanley builds her. And he's like, yeah, don't worry. It didn't cost me anything. And it's like, thanks. Um, he gives that to her as a wedding gift. And then she's able to earn supplemental income for the family. And no, it doesn't threaten their masculinity at all. If anything, they're like, this is great. Like, we need this extra money. Whereas for Loretta Lynn, it's like that's the undoing of her marriage, or so we're led to believe in the film and in other writing about her life, is that like her husband can't handle that she can not only supplement the family income, but then go on to totally support the whole family.
Well, I think that's part of just how many people are raised in the United States to think of anything that women do as extra, or sort of like you watch enough people online where it's like, well, that's her side hustle, or that's
Right.
her sort of like quirky business, or like this extra thing that she does. And I actually think one of the best parts of the book, best written, I'm also obsessed lately with buying fancy soap so my skin doesn't crack this winter, is
Fair.
the description of her playing around with intensity and what I almost want to think of as flavor, but scent, and the consistency of the soap. And soap is something that I think we're learning some people didn't wash their hands before this pandemic, and
Oh, God.
probably
Yeah.
still don't. But thinking of like how vital that would be, and if you've ever kind of come into contact with like a very old fashioned kind of like fatty base soap, it's really not that pleasant.
Mm-mm.
And there's these great descriptions of how much she has to do when she becomes a boarding house keeper herself. She's taking care of these three grown men. And there's this interesting description where like she physically washes these men. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
part of like what she does in the community. So her hands are in sudsy water for laundry, for washing down these men, and like thinking of the value that good soap would have in a coal mining community. It's like gold. And
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And one of my favorite scenes in the book was when she's trying to bond with her oldest stepdaughter, who
mm,
has the most memory of her own mother who's passed, and so is very reticent to take on a new kind of parental figure in her life named Violet. And Violet basically is very standoffish with her until like there's something about the beekeeping that reaches Violet, and she's very drawn in by it. And there's a passage, a really beautiful passage where Anetka is like doing something at home. She's constantly working, and Violet runs in and is like, I've seen a hive. Like basically she's been trying to wait to find a hive so she can start a new like beekeeping
mm,
kind of like the bee box or beat box, you know, whatever you want to call it. And so Violet comes in and is like, I found a hive. And they go and cut it down together and come home. And there's really a beautiful passage of her like spreading the bees out on a cloth and finding the queen and putting her in the bee box. And then all the other bees go to follow her. And that's how they set up that work. And it's just really beautiful moment because not only does Violet clearly see it as a way to bond with her new mother, but it's also like Aneka is like she feels bees in her heart, or like there's some phrase
mm,
that she keeps using that's like she has a gift for this or an inclination to understand like the intuitive stuff you need to know to be very good at this. And when she goes to her dead husband's grave on the year anniversary of her passing, that's what she shares with him as
mm.
like, we're okay. And I don't know, there was something about that that just was very touching to me. That's like there's this thing that's labeled women's work, and it's the thing that bonds her with her daughter.
Well, think of the difference between a mine and a hive, right? One is concave, one is convex. Like they take on these literally different
Mm,
shapes, but they kind of form this inverse of each other. And in both instances, there's like a person who's in charge. In the case of the hive, it's the queen bee, right? So this like kind of aligns well with her. In the case of the mine, it's like people are actually disrupting a natural order and they're taking, right? Like they're extracting from the earth, whereas in the hive, something beautiful is being made that is then pulled out. And something I think this book did a good job of is her younger brother is involved in this like very, very tedious work that there's some photos of in the back where he's like picking through the actual pieces of the coal, and his fingers are becoming bloody, and they're all damaged. And it's kind of interesting because when she, on the other hand, is working with what comes out of the hive, you know, these kind of combs and the honey, like she's unharmed.
Hmm.
right? Like you have these two really kind of interesting things. Like they're both kind of fueling different stuff. But like the way that her brother is like so hurt, and essentially the community says like that's part of the price of it. And then she's doing something dangerous in her own right, but it's so beautiful and healing. It's a
Yeah,
very
what
cool piece.
I think that's a really, really important comparison. And I wonder too what we can make of the comparison between kind of like the healing nature of her work of with the
Hmm.
bees, which doesn't take anything from her and it takes no time for her to be good at it. She just is. It's like a very intuitive based thing versus how everyone in this book talks about love and marriage, which, and particularly for how women should experience it. So, what we learn is that her entire family have had arranged marriages. And so, when her marriage is arranged, it's not at all that strange, maybe for her or for the family, even though she has some real reticence about it, because it's what she's known. And her grandmother has prepared her for this by basically saying, I didn't love your grandfather when we got married either, but love is something that comes with time. And so there's like this real through line through this book of like, what are things in life that you just know immediately and
Hmm.
intuitively? And when can you trust those feelings? And when is something worthwhile, even if you don't feel its value initially, but you should trust it will grow with time?
I would say not coal mining.
Not coal mining.
I don't
No.
I don't I don't know what our coal miner listenership is, so I'm not saying anything about the practice, but in this particular community, it's like this industrial setup is bad for everyone. It's bad for everyone in that like they keep changing the rules. I mean, it's very much representative of what was happening in a lot of industrial communities where people cannot get ahead. They are constantly in debt despite how hard they work. And in particular, her family really gets targeted along with others for not being citizens. And what I thought was really brilliant in this book, kind of to that point you were making, this family, right? Like very typical in that they came from Poland. There's plenty of people in that community who likely have no reason to stay, no desire to stay in the United States, but we're coming for money for a short period of time. And what changes is they suddenly have all this pressure to become US citizens and to file their paperwork because they basically get fined for being immigrants and they have
Mhm.
to pay this kind of penalty almost directly to their employer. And her whole kind of worldview changes when you were saying like things that she values or things that are important to her. This book does not start with any kind of inkling that she wants to be American, that she wants to be part. She really has no connection to American society. She's just like part of this very insular community. And this review also mentions that Leon is patiently waiting in the wings and their relationship is sweetly immature. They're 14.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it is true to their age. Like their
Yeah.
awkwardness around each other, of admitting how they feel about each other, all of these things, like that's entirely like clearly a teenage journey. And that is on point. I think your point is really well taken, though, about the fact that she has no connection. It's interesting that she's the subject of a Dear America book. Like, I don't think she would, if she was here with us, she wouldn't recognize herself as like the prime candidate for being the subject of a series called Dear America, because
No.
most of her life and her personhood is about being Polish and is about the world that she left behind. And even when she's traveling, she does not have, as some of the other passengers have, like, and which is often like now become the stuff of stereotype in a lot of museums about like imagining what America will be like. Like she has no like, I think the streets will be paved with gold and like everyone can work everywhere. Like she doesn't have those fantasies. If anything, her fantasy is about a return. So
Mm.
it's interesting that her friend in the mining town, like when her husband is murdered in the massacre, she immediately is like, I'm going home to be with my family because I have these young children and now no one to support me and I can't live in a company home if I'm not married. And I think like unstated, she doesn't have the resiliency that Anetka has to start a boarding house like overnight. So she's leaving. So she's fulfilling the fantasy Anetka wants. And at that moment, it seems like her fantasy changes and pivots to being like where she's at and building something potentially with Leon. But that's where the epilogue is weird to me because it's like, why aren't we getting this information in the main text? We also were told that Leon and Joseph become American citizens, but she never does, which is significant. Also, not in the book at all.
Well, and the reason that that is explained is because she has no impetus to do so because she's not on the payroll the way that they are.
Right.
And there are boarding house keepers in industrial contexts who are paid directly by corporations, but she's not. She
Definitely
doesn't
not.
have that same relationship. I also was thinking that I don't think this book would get published this way today. I think Scholastic might publish it, but I think a lot of companies would not. Um, while they are making their way into the United States, she thinks that Leon has been deported.
Interesting.
And so she's totally convinced that he is being sent back and then he kind of reappears. I even wonder like if I had read this as a younger person, just given my lack of experience, I don't know that I would have really even understood that.
What deportation is?
Yeah, or just kind of like what process he's going through. Like essentially
Yeah.
he talks about what had been happening in Poland and his role working for the police. And he very much is a teenage boy. He's like, I have committed crimes against humanity. And they're
Oh my
like, I'm
God.
sorry, who are you? And they put him in a separate line and he gets
Yes.
detained, but not deported. And you can just also picture it's like he'd be in 10th grade.
Yeah. Like he's someone who basically is like reading the Communist Manifesto for the first time in high school. And he's like, oh my God, like this is all so real. And I've participated in all these crimes. Like that is deeply his energy. And I have to wonder if, like, if at Ellis Island, he was pulled aside and like also given an IQ test, also evaluated like for like in a really deep way about his politics. And there's also sort of an undercurrent through the book by 1896. Like there is this differentiation in where you're immigrating from.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that comes out in the mining town and the labor unrest that's there, which is like the company has pit the workers against each other so that the American workers have bitterness towards the foreign workers. And when the immigrant workers are being charged for that tax of like 3% or whatever it is, there's no solidarity between the American workers and the immigrant workers, even though they're both being ripped off by the mining company. And it's that solidarity that's needed in the labor movement to like make any real change. But also, like, what comes out sort of between the descriptions of the two groups is like in the so-called American group are like Irish Americans
Mm-hmm.
and immigrants who were seen or like were the source of denigration a generation before. It's like, well, now, like, well, at least they speak English. You know, this is what some Americans would think, and turn their animus towards these immigrants coming from Eastern Europe or Russia or places where they're non-English speaking countries. So you're seeing like literally this transition in immigration history happen and intersect with labor history. So in that sense, like it is like powerful.
And something to the point about, the Irish community, there is a vague reference at one point, and then it's made explicit towards the end, that in Latimer at the time that this happened, there were more than 24 languages that people were speaking. So there are lots of bilingual and probably trilingual people, but there's also just so many. There's very few people who can actually connect across everybody. But what's interesting is there isn't a lot made of common religions or friction about religion. I think
Mm,
the author probably wisely figured like there's only so many topics once her protagonist is in United States that she should take on. And what's kind of interesting in like foreshadowing of the future, Leon is asked if he's a socialist, and he's like Ben, he's on Reddit. I believe in freedom.
oh my
You're an
God.
anarchist then. I believe all should contribute to the good of the community. So I think this is my hot take. I think if the husband, Stanley, hadn't died, Leon would have gotten frustrated within a year. He would have gone back, or he would have done a stint in like the Philippines in 1898.
Sure.
He would have gone back to Poland, and he 100% would have been part of several revolutions by the 19 teens.
I can see that happening. I can very much see that happening. But I think what's interesting is like, where's Anetka in that? Because
Yeah.
I think if she was less religious, she would have gone with him and been like, yes, I'm overturning all of these like imperialist forces that have convinced us to like subject ourselves to this. Like, I'm throwing it all away. In the same way that I think like Leon has that rebellious character. And we do get a characterization of him that he doesn't go to church, or when he does go, he doesn't behave. So I think you're spot on, but it doesn't spell like it does. It's not positive for like the likelihood that they would end up together at some point. Like I think for that to
No.
happen, Aneka would have to leave her husband, in the middle of the night and be like, okay, bye, I'm going to Poland, and tell grandma like another version of events. But
One thing I think is really accurate to that point, she starts to write a letter where she writes about what she's dissatisfied about in the United States and specifically with Stanley. And she's going to write it to her best girlfriend who is still back in Poland. And then she burns it. And I
mm,
think that's kind of an interesting point about archives that crisscross, diasporas and crisscross communities. Like, what are the letters that people don't send about what it's like to be an immigrant? And like, obviously, Dear America, they use words like plucky, just like American Girl has, spirited and spunky and like all these code words. What I think is interesting about this protagonist, like the central character, is like she's more emotionally sophisticated than most people around her. And there's a point when her husband, Stanley, talks about her diary as chicken scratch, and she's very offended because she's both very proud of this as a text and she's very proud of her penmanship. And clearly, like, she's 13 and she's not in school, so she's had to fight, right, for
mm-hmm.
these things. And it's kind of like that's a little bit too of what sets her apart. Like, all these characters, when they put them in these kind of really challenging contexts, it's like, but they're different because they're really smart, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think too, it's sort of like this is a bit of a pivot, but I think something that sort of took me by surprise or that was kind of uncomfortable reading was sort of like the sexual violence or the threat of sexual violence going through this book. Like we open with an attempted assault, obviously in Poland, that kind of sparks her immediate departure. In addition to the father basically selling her in marriage. And now,
Yeah.
admittedly, she comes from a culture of arranged marriage. There is like an off book reference to her wedding night and the fact that she basically says like some things cannot be written about in a diary. And after that thing happened, like Stanley rolled over and went to sleep. And basically, like, I was like, what was that? And then she's conflicted because like he doesn't want to kiss her. He never wants to hold her hand. Like there's no intimacy in their marriage. But at the same time, like after he leaves, she's living with a house full of men she does not know. So there's also like this completely undiscussed threat of sexual violence through her entire life. And I think the book in some ways like doesn't expressly deal with that. It introduces the reality of her situation, but I think for me it's something it's very hard to appreciate like how precarious and how unsafe like her day-to-day existence was as a 14-year-old girl in this world who had very little to kind of secure her way apart from like her ability to like keep a house.
It's interesting because one of the very few bad reviews of this book that I found was someone saying like you should not buy this book, and their headline was that it teaches you nothing about history, which I think is not true. But really, like, the line that this reviewer believed was cross was that quote, the author puts things in the book that should not be put in a book meant for younger people. And so part of what she's talking about is the sexual component, right? Like the threat of sexual violence. And also there's lots of references to the fact that her friends are getting pregnant, right? And like they're very happy and, all these kinds of things. But I think in some ways it's like, that's reality for people, right? Like, we talk about certain things as if they only exist in the past tense. Like, children are trafficked as part of sex markets. Children are married to other people. Some children enter into marriages with other people. Like, these things are not things that are, first of all, this book wasn't from that long ago, and it's definitely something that happened a lot in that time period. So depending on your age, it's like, this is not that many generations back.
It's
Like, for me,
not.
it would be great grandparents. So it's really like not that far away. And these things do still happen today. And there are cultural differences around what people think about very young people getting married and how people interpret consent differently.
I agree. And I wonder what you make of the fact that she doesn't actually get pregnant in her first
Right.
marriage. Like she's married to him for a year before his death. And she never gets pregnant or has a child. But I wonder, like, what work does it do in this book to not have her have a child? Does it make it seem like less upsetting that she's to like readers in 2000 or 2020 that she's 14 and married to a man who's 25, 26?
Yeah, I think that might be part of it. But I also think something that's kind of useful about that is like we know medically that there are reasons why some women don't get pregnant, right? Related to nutrition, related to all different kinds of things. And I also felt like they were trying to somehow drop a hint, like there was like some weird, like kind of reference where it was like, and in all those years, they only had one child, like which felt like sort
Which
of like
was
a hint
weird.
about her.
Yeah. Yeah, I bumped against that too. And the like once again, this epilogue, like so much work
Like,
done,
huh?
and it's like, excuse me, like they're like, and it is, and they're like, in case you're wondering, yes, it is very strange that in 67 years of marriage they only had one child, and it's like,
Like I was
well,
not wondering,
I
to be
wasn't really
honest.
thinking about that, but okay, I guess like it's
Can I just
strange.
share, like, there are also like so many parts of this book that I just found like genuinely surprising. Like, I'm gonna be honest, the Poland part was a bit of a struggle for me. I felt like there was like a lot of work happening of explaining the geopolitics of Poland for 50
Yeah,
pages.
yeah,
And then she really becomes herself in the way that all people do at different timelines in their lives. But her first summer there, like, she's a married gal now. She's like 13 and a half. There's also passages like this that come out of nowhere. A large black snake was found near the schoolhouse. An Italian man clubbed it and carried it on a pole through the streets of Lattimer before it died. The snake measured 5.5 feet long. And it's like, we don't get to the bottom of things like her fertility because there's so many
there's
passages like
things like that
that.
happening. Yeah. And when that's in there, like that has absolutely nothing to do with the plot. It's never spoken of again. It has no relationship to literally anything else in that book. It's like a from nowhere story about a snake. And you're like, did this happen? Here's my theory about that anecdote when I read it. She goes on in the back of the book about her own family history. And I can
Yes.
only imagine that this is a story that's been passed down through her family. And she's like, hey, grandma, like wink, wink. There's something in this book that you might recognize.
It's how some diarists, I mean, the diarists who aren't like savvy enough to like throw their work away, like how they are, right? Like we've read enough
Yeah.
historic diaries where it's like you think you're kind of getting a vibe on someone. And then there's these passages that kind of really strike you out of nowhere. And it's like how humor doesn't always connect over time. It makes you pause and say, like, there's something I don't understand about this world where this was newsworthy.
I also think it makes us think about what diaries are for or how you should approach it as a diarist yourself. Like, if this is a book for an audience of one person and that person is as a witness to your every waking hour, just as the author is, they're one and the same, you probably don't feel the need to kind of deploy narrative techniques of segues or connecting passages or trying to figure out like a superstructure of like, this is the overarching point of this entry. Like, I want to communicate this message or tell this story or stay with this theme. Instead, it's like, oh my God, I'm married to this guy who like says his wife, dead wife's name in his sleep. And like, oh my God, my daughters hate me and this and that. And oh, there's a snake and there's a snake that was caught and it was carried through the streets. Anyway, then I like worked on my bees and this and that. It's like, you wouldn't feel the need, I don't think, to be like, okay,
No.
I have to plot this out like it's a murder mystery. Like every detail must be telling in some way as a clue, or it's a romance, or it's a tragedy. It's like you just sort of are writing down almost like a grocery list, like these are the events of my day.
She also has a great passage where she records a conversation with Stanley. She's very much like Dorothy from Golden Girls in that way.
100%.
So he confronts her about the diary and says, "You have thoughts important enough to write down?" He laughs. For the first time, I noticed that his laugh comes from the top of his throat, not his belly, like Leon's. Stanley snapped on his coveralls and plunked his miner's hat on his head. To me, that passage is like she's revolted by him. And then she ends it by saying, "I wonder where Leon is working." And part of what I loved about that is like, again, she's a very emotionally smart person. And just this thing of like, I feel like that was the equivalent of like people who poke at folks who say like that's funny versus laughing. Like, I don't think there's a right or wrong way. Like, when I find something very, very funny, I will often say, that's not funny. And I will be like
Yes.
unable to breathe. I find it so funny. Or I'll be like, I'll say, that's funny. There are other people who find that as a practice repulsive. And to me, it's like she's seeing that he's not a belly laugher. And for whatever reason, she's like, I can't.
Yeah, I think it's like a really interesting moment where it's like her own lack of self-awareness about what's going on, but also like it's telling about her what she finds desirable. So the thing that's telling about her desire is she loves someone like Leon who laughs with his from his belly or like his whole person. But what's interesting is that she lacks any self-awareness about why she's even noticing this in Stanley. Like it's supposed to tell her that she has feelings for Leon and she doesn't for her husband and what she's supposed to do with that. But instead she's like, yeah, anyway, like weird detail about this man I may never see again.
Well, I think that's where like we live in the age of the individual and she does not.
I think that's true. Like she actually never begrudges the fact that she has to marry this guy or like that her father has essentially sold her in marriage for 3 tickets across the Atlantic. And she
Yeah.
keeps noting the father's what she's reading, choosing to read as shame in him when she first arrives and he takes her for a walk and is like, yeah, you want to meet your future husband tomorrow? Like we'll go for a picnic. And she feels like she's reading shame in that moment, but she never puts on him like, geez, I wish my dad had not done this. Like, I wish I could just marry someone that I want to marry, or that even that would be a realistic expectation. In fact, what she hits you with is like, well, every marriage in my like in family history that we can recall was arranged. So like this is just what we're all expected to do.
I think that's where she and Leon then overcorrect according to the epilogue, where they're like, you can marry anyone you want. And they're the parents and grandparents who are like, no, we're totally cool with it. Like they married people from all different faiths and backgrounds, and like we don't even notice. Like he's Italian, but we don't even notice.
We don't see race, we don't see
Like we don't
religion. They
they're
refer
like
to their grandchildren as the United Nations question
yes.
mark, and you're like, Grandpa Leon, this is a bit uncomfortable.
I will say this book had a very intense also note. So the whole time, like I do think the author Susan was working out some stuff about her brother. I'm just guessing.
Yes.
So the one person that this main character resents is her brother Joseph. Like she's really had it with him. And there's a whole thing about how like he becomes very politically active. Like ultimately Leon pulls it back and Joseph like turns it up. So he works for a railroad company and then he enlists in World War I. And it's like she just had to like take him out. She was like, he dies at
He's
29.
dead. Yep. She's
He's
like,
done.
he was killed. He's gone. 29. Bye.
Yeah. She's like, no one ever saw the grandma again. And it's like she still loved making out with her husband. Like that never changed.
Okay. The description of like her kissing Leon,
Yeah.
honestly, it was like when I kiss Leon, like I feel it down through my feet. Like my feet go into the floor. And it's like, okay. Like there's something to this where Susan is like, I am leaning into like every Tiger Bee instinct I've ever had. Like every description of what kissing is to like a teenager. Or maybe that's just how she experiences it. I don't know. But that's what she's. It's like almost like the comparison has to be so extreme between Stanley and Leon that it's like it's not even the same act being described almost.
I do think Kobe Calais read this as a young person and then was like, starts in the toes.
Starts in the toes.
She's like, I
It's up
crinkle
my
my nose.
nose. Yeah, she's like, woo.
She's like, I got it.
She's like, totally understand.
This book really did do a good job, I thought, of like blending a lot without it being overdone. Like I kind of was surprised. Like I don't know, like I knew because I had done my reading that a big event was happening in this community. But what I think was very well done about the exposition is when the massacre actually happens in Latimer, I think you are a little bit surprised because things have been so tense. It's like the frogs in the pot of water that gradually heats up. And I think what this author really gets right in a way that I think a lot of people struggle with when they write about factory towns is it's not one thing, right?
Yeah.
It's the changes in the rates, it's the changes in the debt structure. And like, even for Stanley, he has a meltdown at one point because he finds out that they've been buying candy on credit. And he's like, stop, don't do that. And you realize like how little agency people have. And so they're freaking out over things that they probably wouldn't in another situation. And all these things, it's cumulative, they add up. And then we have this like intense period of violence. But then also it's like they stay, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's what's interesting is like the one fantasy of America that she knows before she goes is that the father writes to her and says, you know, anyone can have, like, everyone can get a job here, which is a commentary on Poland for sure. Like, that's the contrast we're supposed to draw. But it's also like, okay, if that's true, if jobs are so plentiful, why do you continue to do this one? And it's probably because the wages are much higher for comparable manual work. And obviously, like, immigrant groups are being recruited directly into it. And the cost of your passage is like literally taken out of your future wages. It's described as almost a month's worth of wages. And so you can see how this happens, but then it becomes like this generational, like, family story where families stay for years and years and years. And like, we're kind of like, frankly, now living with the outcome of that, which is, what do you do when there's nothing, when there is no mining left in your area, or it's not like a viable option?
I worked in the house, as you know, of someone who made his millions through coal mining. And I heard stories that when it first opened, coal miners came and they were not there for the tour. They were there to like say their piece, you know, like the way that this whole kind of community of misery adds up to a very small number of people being very wealthy. And even one of the like upper middle class people who lives in this community, when some of the workers storm into his house, they realize that just his silverware is more than what they make in a year. So it's like, this fork is more valuable than all these people. And then even in the peek into the past equivalent, there's a line, Polish men often accepted the worst and most dangerous jobs, mine jobs, for the least pay. And it's like, right, like, this is like what people have to do to survive. Like, no one was putting on their resume, like, willing to do the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think it's also a really sad commentary on like structural power and sort of the self-awareness, or at least the acquiescence to your relative individual lack of any agency within that structure. And you can see how people sort of throw up their hands and are like, well, how can I possibly improve my situation when it's just me against, you know, this like morass of a corporation or whatever is going on. And that's where I think like the union plot line in this book, and obviously the existence of unions themselves, can be so heartening, because it is a way of like creating agency and creating change. One thing I found interesting that's not in this book, but is in her description of writing this book at the end, is she describes the role that women actually played in these protests. And in fact, I think there's someone named Big Mary, not to be confused with me,
with you,
which is tragic. Although I will say that my grandmother, whom I was named after, which today is actually would have been her 95th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, missing her today. But when she was alive, she used to say, I don't like it when people call us Mary when we're together, because then they might be tempted to say, well, I'm Big Mary and you're Little Mary, which in fact people used to do. And she didn't like being called Big Mary. But this Big Mary, this historic Big Mary, she actually did quite a lot. And according to Susan, inspired her in some ways to write this book, amongst other things that are not in her description, like family issues and whatever. So it's sort of like, why are we centering this story on a woman who's definitely political, but the power relationships that are important or inherent in her life and political are in the home and in the marriage and in the family? Why aren't we getting a Big Mary 2.0 as the center of this Dear America, or at least someone who was with her group of women who then stormed, you know, these various protests?
I think number one, she came across Big Mary Septech and was like, I'm saving that for later. Like,
interesting.
A woman who wrote books on the Hitler Youth and women in the KKK. Like, she's not shy about violence, but I think part of what she's choosing to do is like, what is it like to have like a little bit of power in your own way, but to really just to be sort of like in a community as a little bit more than a bystander when something big happens. Like, I think that's really what Dear
Mm.
America is about. Like, the girl on the Titanic, she's not the one who spots the iceberg. The young girl who's at Yorktown is like, oh, my feet are really cold. But like, she's not, Felicity is like staging spy rings. These girls are not that, you know?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. It's like they are bystanders of history. And I think because that allows the franchise to sort of create a fictional person and position them adjacent to a major
Yes.
historic event without them. Like, obviously, the fantasy of this falls apart if you're like, oh, well, this was like Ben Franklin's sister, who, like, which he did have a sister, but, like inventing some person who didn't exist or for whom we have no, written diary or foreign correspondence. And it's so clear that it's an invention. Whereas this, it's like I've read reviews where for multiple Dear Americas, people are like, "Wait a second, this isn't real. Like this wasn't a real person."
Yes, a lot of people bring that up, and I think that's also like so someone else called this book the worst, but pretty much people really really love this book. So this person says, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone under 15. They would not understand it or like it, mainly for women. Whoever reads this, I'm telling you, it's not as great as it says it is.
What?
I also love that Megan gave it 3 stars. She said nothing wowed me. And then Judith follows up. I thought this book was true, but found it was fiction. I was very disappointed. And I do kind of get that, where it's like I would also be disappointed. But yeah.
Well, also, like, Megan, what have you been through that nothing in this book wowed you?
I don't know.
She's massive, like violent protests with like, many people lost their lives. Girl married and widowed at 14, like mother of 3 children, bee operation, leaving Poland. She's like basically like paging Shania Twain that don't impress me much. She's like, moving on, don't care.
Maybe after reading the Kirsten books, she was like, after those bee scenes,
oh my God.
Or maybe she just loves bee movie and she thought this would be different than
she was like, I believed the bees should be centered more. Like, what is their story?
I mean, I just respect the author a lot for like really just kind of being like interested in her family's history, like doing more research and then kind of figuring out like, how do I tell this story? And knowing that around the time this comes out, Hillbilly Elegy is also coming out, which I have read that book. Like something that completely changed my mind, because after I read that book, I read reviews because I was like, this doesn't seem good. And that's obviously the consensus among most people now. But this review that like really flipped my whole perception of mining communities such as this one was this phrase essentially that like they're not underdeveloped, they're overexploited, right? That like these are not places like, if you think of anthracite country within the United States as sort of like Silicon Valley today, right? Like this network of communities that have a ton of resources that are excessively taxed or excessively tapped by entities that don't invest in those communities. It's like an internal colony. Obviously Silicon Valley is not that, but it's like, this is actually like a rich in resources corridor that gets overexploited. And then people who put nothing into the community say like, well, what's wrong with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Appalachia and.
Yep. 100%. I'm not going to reference that documentary. I'm not doing it.
You can. I know you want to.
Well, now I'm paranoid about it because,
you're not. You're not. Listen.
Me.
I did not tease you. We crushed it with the pronunciations, unless someone Polish is listening and they're like, you probably didn't. I've been to Poland. Did I already say that on this episode?
I don't think you're like dropping this now. Like, tell us more.
I loved it. It's absolutely beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life.
Wow. I mean, humble brag. Some of us haven't been to Poland, and I'm like feeling it. I wish I had, but
I really was taken with it, and like a thing that was like a very quick like boop, like right to my heart. So they don't really have a lot of drive-throughs in the places where I was, and I know that is more of an American thing anyway. People are just in these carts and they go right up to the cars and they sell you bagels and pastries.
Excuse me?
I've never eaten more bread in my life than when I was in Poland, and it was all wonderful, and it was like the equivalent of 40 cents. And I was just like, wow, this is so good. Like, I'm not saying she should have gone back, but I'm saying
There could have been good bagels had she
I
gone
don't know.
back. Interesting.
Please talk about Harlan County, USA. I know it's your passion. I do.
It's not like a passion, but it's like, I do think it's a very good documentary. That's all I'm going to say. And it is on YouTube. So I'm always into like sharing things that are very accessible. And now, is this legally accessible? No, but some hero has put this on YouTube. And it's made by a woman filmmaker who has gone on to make some very good films, including oh my God. The one about the Dixie Chicks, Just Stand Up and Sing, or whatever that one's called.
Oh, Shut Up and Sing.
Shut Up and Sing. And she trained with the Maisels, who, of course, made Grey Gardens, which both you and I love. She makes this documentary. My favorite ones are ones in which the filmmaker does not insert themselves, like paging Michael Moore, like take a step back. And so she's not in this, but she goes there and she's like actually filming a strike between miners and, hate to say this, but the Duke Power Company in North Carolina. So, you know, we do have Doris Duke as a shared side interest. But in the year 1976, when she's there and they're on strike in Kentucky, the power company had a profit of 170%. And yet their workers were living in company homes that didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity. And they were paid like significantly beneath what was like an average minimum wage, and like were expected to live at a standard of living that was way below even the rest of the state, you know, invested in different industries. So I think watching something like that and seeing the disparities, I think it really does bear out what you were saying about sort of internal colonies that are overexploited. It's very obvious there what's going on in that film. And to me, like, documentaries are something that really helps me like think with history or explore different ideas. So if you've not seen it,
so weird about the like.
I am not. It's really good. Allison just doesn't understand. And there's also a woman who is my favorite person in this film. And she's like the one who's basically like, no one is riding as hard for this protest as I am. And at one point, like, apparently a lot of the protesters had guns, or like the scabs had guns, the people like sent to break up the protest. And so Lois just like pulls a revolver out of her bra. And it's like truly one of the most iconic moments I've ever seen on film. I remember seeing this in college for the first time and just being like, what am I watching? And it's very, very good. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that movie. That's it.
I love how much you love it. I do. It's just very funny. It is just something that you like if unions come up, you're like,
I'm like, Harlan County, USA. Because to me, it's like,
it's great.
That radicalized me. Like, I don't know. It's like, I saw that when I was 18 and I knew a lot of these topics before, but there was something about seeing it where I was like, oh my God, like, this is crazy. And I don't know. It got me. It got me. But, you know, that and Coal Miner's Daughter, which is obviously a very different journey, but wow. That's another book on my list, which we will have to pursue, which is there's a new-ish book out about Loretta Lynn and Patsy Cline's friendship, which, you know,
crazy.
There was just like a TV movie about that not that long ago, which I watched, and, you know, it was not great, but I'm always there for that content. So maybe we'll check that out.
Can I just say, so I was not, like, if you're in an archive and you're not eavesdropping on the people who are like,
you're doing it wrong,
paying for research. So I haven't been in an archive much because of COVID, but I was fortunate to be in one a few months ago. And there was a person there doing research on a particular community that was known as pretty aggressively anti-union, and totally innocently, like this wasn't her background. She was like kind of like paying to get certain research. She just asked the archivist, so what is a scab? And it was like my heart stopped because I felt like,
oh my God,
like change is about to happen, right? Like change is about to happen, like right in front of my very eyes. And I was like pretending to look through some books. And then I was like, I need to listen to every word of this discussion.
Did they get a good answer?
They did get a very good answer. And I think I think part of what comes out in this book and part of what comes out in good history is people make choices within a context, right?
Right.
So it's like, what is the context in which like a particular community? And part of what was explained to her was within the church that many of these people belong to, religious leaders were telling them that joining unions was bad for their community. And they valued that religious community over other things. So it's not to promote or excuse any behavior, but it's like, well, we need to understand what was the spectrum of choices that people felt they had. And in a community that was very much insular in terms of language, there is a really good chance like they didn't understand the messaging of the union or the IWW anyway. On a literal level.
Yeah.
So until there was outreach both ways where people are literally talking the same language, no, these people are not going to join a group when their church, which has been part of their life for thousands of years in their community, what are you going to side with?
Yeah, I think that's a good point about like competing loyalties and how everyone has like more than one identity that's often sometimes at odds with each other. And what do you do in those circumstances?
Like there's no religious figure who speaks up in this book. And if they had, it would be a different story.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, actually, that's an interesting point that the church does figure in this book. And yet there's no like singular priest figure who shows up and is like, hey, FYI, don't take part in that protest tomorrow. Like that would be a bad idea, which we know happened, right? But instead, the priest only shows up at the wake, and he's referenced in passing as like saying the funeral mass for Stanley, R.I.P. But he's not around when they're planning all of this, like, or even when they go to that boarding house where she lived originally when she first arrived, where they're having these sort of more radicalized conversations about labor and how unhappy they are and how unfair it all is. You would imagine that the priest is going to show up at some point and say like, yeah, I heard that Leon and company are planning a protest. This would be bad news for you for the following reasons. Like he's just completely MIA. And it's like, maybe Susan was like, I'm not taking that on.
I love that for her.
Yeah, she was like, I'm taking on a lot in this book. I draw a line in the sand.
This book won me over.
I think it won me over too. It had a slow start, or I kind of just was like, I don't know where this is going. But it was not an enjoyable read, but I don't think it was designed to be an enjoyable read to like counter what the other reviewers are saying. But for me, it's like, it was interesting to be in that headspace of 1896 and sort of imagining what's in this story and what's not in this story and why, which is sort of like, as someone looking back at Dear America, I think those are the interesting things to think with in these books.
I agree. What do we have next on deck? It's something kind of different.
I mean, it's in a similarly cerebral light when we talk about competing identities at war with each other, when we talk about a woman being married to a much older man who ends up exploiting her. Everybody, please take a beat. Like, remember where you were when you got this news. Next month, we are reading The Meaning of Mariah Carey by Mariah Carey,
which we will be calling A Music Executive's Bride.
Yes. As she refers to, I want to take a similarly shady anonymous view as she does in the book, at one point in the book, I'll just say as a teaser, she's referring clearly to Jennifer Lopez and refuses to name her and instead calls her a fellow like Capitol recording artist. It's so iconic, honestly. And I've read this book in hard copy. Like I own a hard copy of this book that I'll reread for this. But I just want to give out as a teaser that some people have told me, friends who have listened to this book, hello, Terry and Abby, if you're listening, that listening to Mariah Carey read her own book is the way to go because she actually sings part of her songs. Hearing her voice, she has a beautiful like speaking voice to listen to. So I might actually find the audiobook to do for the next round. So if that's at all appealing to you, if you're an audiobook person, I would make that recommendation.
I love that. That's a very good tip.
So we'll see. And also, like, I will be pumping Mariah Carey's Unplugged, a severely underrated album. And when I posted that before, someone was like, I actually think people do rate this highly. And I'm like, not highly enough, okay?
Yeah, unless
Not for
she's
me.
getting Kennedy Center honors, it's not enough.
When we have a PowerPoint party, mine will likely be Mariah Carey related, my presentation, and I'm just preparing you in advance. I don't know exactly what kind of argument I will be making about her at this time, but it will, it will be powerful. If you enjoyed our episode of Jessica Simpson or you're at all interested in memoirs, especially celebrity memoirs, this one is genuinely very good. I'm not like lying about that. And I would tell you if I thought it was good in like a not good way, but this is, I think, actually good.
Jessica Simpson's memoir has actually appeared on quite a few top book lists for the year. And I totally agree with it being one of the more interesting and introspective books I've ever read.
I totally agree with that. Like, all kidding aside, I think it's a genuinely very good memoir. And to me, like, having just talked about a fictional memoir here, a diary, and moving to a real one, I think the secret to a really good memoir or autobiography is your capacity for introspection and self reflection. So when people just write ones that are basically resume points strewn together, it sort of reads like the diary entry that's like, and then I found a snake that was dead. It's like, okay, well, this doesn't really mean anything to me because it hasn't really meant much to you. You haven't thought about it enough. Whereas with both Mariah Carey and Jessica Simpson, one, they've both clearly done some therapy work and have done that practice of reflecting on your past and trying to find common patterns. But also, they're just very good storytellers. And I think they're very introspective or like they're very self reflective in a way that I find useful. And Mariah Carey's co writer is actually a scholar of African American history. So she actually puts a lot of things in context that are really interesting. So, it has a lot to say about identity and not only just like the career high points that we all know about. And, I'll just say, like, am I still traumatized by some Derek Jeter details? Yes, but we will get into that.
Yes, we will.
I'm very
excited.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I think it will be a good time. And I think we're also planning to do a watch along, right, Allison?
Yes, we would love to hear from you. We loved your ideas and we're saving a lot of them. We got so many great ideas for the November suggestions. We're just pocketing some of them for early 2021. We will put up a poll in late November, early December. We'd love to do some holiday watch along with you. So we'll put up some ideas and we love when you're able to vote and give some feedback. And we really appreciate you being part of this community and the ways that you engage with it and just that you like to have even more of us in your feed.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And I'll just say, we've added some channels to the Discord, including a book recommendation channel, which I love checking out. I've already added a bunch of books people are talking about there to my to-read list. And I love the pop culture feed and the Bachelor feed. So thanks to everyone who's taking part in that. We really do appreciate you. And if there's a topic that you think is channel worthy, let us know. It's very easy for us to add one. So, we're hoping to, meet whatever needs the community is signaling.
Love that.
So until next month, all I want for Christmas is to read that book again with you, Allison. I'm so excited. Can't wait.
And if people want to connect with you, where should they find you?
Let's see. If you really want to connect with me, hit me up on Instagram at Mimi Mahoney. Would love to hear from you. Or Twitter at Mary Mahoney123. And Allison, what about you?
So I am at Allison Horrocks on both Twitter and Instagram. You can follow the show, which we are 9 followers away from 10,000 right now.
Oh my God.
On American Girls Podcast on Instagram or A Girls Pod on Twitter. And if you're listening to this, you already know all about our Patreon. So thank you.
Thank you so much for supporting the show. We really do appreciate you, and we can't wait for next month. See you then.
Yay!